Morning. I'd like to introduce this morning's keynote. This morning we are lucky to have David Epstein. David Epstein is a science writer and investigative reporter and author of the New York Times bestseller, The Sports Gene. He was previously a reporter at the investigative outfit ProPublica, and before that a senior writer at Sports Illustrated, where he wrote or co-wrote many of the magazine's most high-profile stories, like the 2009 revelation that Yankees third baseman Alex Rodriguez had used steroids. His work has been featured in outlets from This American Life to National Geographic. He has a master's degree in environmental science and knew in grad school that he wanted to be a scientist. You can see how that worked out. Please join me in welcoming David Epstein.
Thank you very much. Before I get started, I just want to say I was just sitting over there by myself, and Brent came up to me to say hi. And as of a couple years ago, I was like deathly afraid of speaking. Like I puked backstage like before a talk I gave, and Brent saw me and just kind of said, "Oh, you're doing your pregame. I'll talk to you later," which I really appreciated, and I thought was really, because some of the skills I learned as an athlete are things that I now apply to this thing, which I was deathly afraid of doing. So I thought that was like a really cool way to start. And now, I want to make one particular point that I hope will help set a tone for this meeting, but I want to do it in a really roundabout way. So, for starters, I wrote a book about genetics and athleticism, and I'm sure this will be a huge surprise to a room of sports psychologists that I started getting a lot of emails from people with children, asking how to turn their children into legendary athletes, right? I made the mistake of putting my email address online briefly, and so I had to abandon it because I got so overloaded by people asking how to turn their children into legendary athletes. That's a pretty difficult question, so I started conceiving demonstrations that I would share with parents to try to help them understand why this is such a hard question they're asking. And I want to start by sharing one of those with you. And to do that, I want you just to try to use your imagination. Put yourself in a recent world championships of the 100 meters. Try to picture that atmosphere. This particular one was held in Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow. There were 80,000 fans. It was standing room only, because everyone was there to see the fastest man in history, the Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt, right? So try to put yourself in that atmosphere, right? There are flash bulbs popping all around the stadiums. The 9 fastest men in the world are coiling themselves in their starting blocks. And just humor me for a second. Just close your eyes. You're all good at visualization. Close your eyes for a couple seconds and try to imagine that atmosphere in the race while I tell you what happened. Ready? Bang. The starter's gun goes off, an American sprinter jumps out to the front, Usain Bolt starts to catch him, Usain Bolt passes him, and as the runners come to the line, you'll hear a beep as each man crosses the finish. Okay, you can open your eyes now. So that's the entire finish of the race. And I picked this particular race because it was a blowout. So you might actually be able to hear the difference between some of the beeps. So that first beep was Usain Bolt. That second beep, maybe a room of sports enthusiasts, raise your hand if you know who that second beep was. Most people don't. Very few people, even in a room of sports enthusiasts, right? That second beep is a guy that was 0.5% back, an American world champion, who's basically anonymous, even in the United States. Right? So the difference between legendary, a guy who's worth $20 to $30 million a year, and a guy who was basically anonymous, even in his home country, is 0.5%. The guy who was 1% back had to have an off-season job. So that's the differences that parents are asking about, right? And it's less than the margin of error of anything that's done in sports science, so telling someone how to get it is basically impossible. So often the differences are less than 1%, and this has increasingly been true as the principles of high performance and talent identification have spread across the world. The differences between good and great and legendary have gotten so small that they're much, much harder to get at. See, listen again and see if you can hear the difference between beep 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, the off-season job dividing line. Ready? That's it. That guy in 9th was like doing some work as a tax attorney, right? So that's what people are asking you to get, and it's really difficult. We know some of the ingredients that go into this, right? It's like I, up until recently, lived in New York, and we have a joke: if somebody stops you and asks you how to get to Carnegie Hall, you say practice, practice, practice. So we know from aggregate studies that athletes who go on to become elite spend more time in deliberate practice, right? Like effortful, cognitively engaged practice than athletes who plateau at nearly. No big surprise. But I want to tell a story about the specific power of practice that illuminates something about elite performance. I want to use these two to do it. So Barry Bonds, right? Notorious for a variety of reasons, some of which might intersect with your work. But here he is, whatever you think about him. Here's a picture of him in 2003 having probably the greatest statistical hitting season that any baseball player has ever had. And here he is at the Major League Baseball All-Star game with his arm around a woman named Jenny Finch. Jenny at the time was one of the best softball pitchers in the world, and Barry spotted her and walked up and threw his arm around her and said, "Hey, I've seen you pitch to all of those little girls. Come pitch against a man. I'll show you how a real man hits." Right? And you can see her kind of like looking at him skeptically, right? So he like really starts unfurling his peacock feathers and says, no, really, come, I'll show you how a real man hits. Get a cameraman, because I want the whole world to see, and bring a net, because I'll hit you in the face with the ball. This is how Barry flirts, telling people to hit them in the face with the ball. Works every time, I'm sure. So eventually Jenny got fed up, right? Now, Barry didn't have to be a jerk about it, right? But he kind of had a point. I mean, he was at the time crushing 100-mile-per-hour fastballs in a way that nobody in history ever had. Jenny throws 60 to 65. She throws from a closer mound, but the pitch is so much slower that the transit time of the ball is actually a little longer. So if Barry has reflexes fast enough to hit 100-mile-per-hour fastballs, clearly he's going to crush 65-mile-per-hour softballs, plus the ball's like a grapefruit. But anyway, Jenny gets fed up with him and says, fine, whatever. Gets a cameraman, gets a net, goes out to visit Barry, and after about 3 pitches, all the cameraman gets is this 45 minutes of his feet in the dirt, because Barry misses so badly he won't let the guy film anymore, and goes over and makes him put the camera down. Barry can't even hit a foul ball off Jenny Finch. Right? I want to show you, this worked out so well for Jenny that it became a television show where she would go around and strike out Major League Baseball teams' best hitters every week. So I want to show you a clip where she was invited to a charity softball game for Major League Baseball All-Stars, and she was actually only invited as a ceremonial coach, but her team went down, so they put her into pitch. Take a look at what happens. Here she is against probably the greatest hitting catcher of all time.
Now you might fire up, Piazza. Let's see.
Those guys have seen the TV show.
Wow. That's what I was asking out of the pools when you stand here and you face Randy Johnson or Pedro Martinez or Roger Clemens, and you're able to hit them at some point. And then you stand here and face, well, they've got no chance to hit this.
So you hear the announcer say they've got no chance to hit this. How's that possible if they have reflexes fast enough to hit 100-mile-per-hour fastballs, that they can't hit 63-mile-per-hour softball pitches that have a transit time that's slightly longer? It turns out, actually, they don't have reflexes fast enough to hit 100-mile-per-hour fastballs. Right? The average simple reaction time of Major League Baseball hitters, about 200 milliseconds, 1/5 of a second. That's the time it takes just to see that an object's in front of you, for that information to cross the synapses to the back of your brain, and for you to initiate muscular action. Not to do something, just to get your muscle fibers to start twitching. And that's half the total flight time of the pitch, just to send the signal that it's time to start moving. Right? And that 200 milliseconds is the same average for teachers, doctors, lawyers, Major League Baseball hitters. I'm sure journalists are a little bit slower. But that's not only that, but we don't even have a visual system capable of tracking an object as its angular position is changing that rapidly as it gets close to our head. So that advice that people give to keep your eye on the ball, like to little leaguers, it's nonsense, can't do it, right? They could close their eyes when the pitch were halfway in. If it weren't psychologically upsetting, it would make no difference at all to their performance. So the way that hitters can overcome these biological limitations is they've learned through specific types of training to pick up on cues from the pitcher's body, movements of the torso, the rotation of the shoulder, the flicker of the pitch, which is the flashing pattern that the seams of the ball make as it spins, and to group it into what some of you who might be studying skill acquisition might refer to as a chunk, right? A single signal that takes a group of disparate data, turns it into one unconscious signal that says ball's going here or there, swing or don't swing. And they have to make this decision as soon as the ball comes out of the pitcher's hand. And when they are faced with unfamiliar body movements, unfamiliar movements of the torso, unfamiliar rotation of the shoulder, unfamiliar spin of the ball, they are stripped of that learned expertise that allows them to predict what's coming in the future. So they're left purely with their reaction skills, and their reaction skills are not fast enough, right? This is software, not hardware, as the saying goes. It didn't come with the Barry Bonds machine. He downloaded it through specific types of learning. And in fact, baseball and softball are not even among the most time-limited sports. So Muhammad Ali could execute a jab from first perceptible motion to full extension in 150 milliseconds. That's the time it would take your eyelid to move if I walk up and shine a light in your face. So if his opponents weren't judging based on his body movements, anticipating they'd be hit flush by every punch, right? And his brilliance at disguising those movements is part of what often made that the case. But take a look at how this plays out. So here you can see this guy can see this punch coming, right? It's coming right in his, yeah, you can't tell me he doesn't see that one. But watch this next one. This next one's coming like all the way from the West Coast here. This one's taken about as long as a punch could possibly ever take. And you can't tell me this guy doesn't see it. His eyes are open and he sees what's coming for him, right? But the interesting thing is not that he doesn't dodge the punch, that he doesn't even begin to flinch. Because that punch came from a weird angle, right? Because it was this sort of recoil punch, and so it confounded his anticipatory abilities. So he can't even send the signal to begin flinching, and now this guy's anticipatory skill is going to waste because he's going to swing about a foot over his head as he goes down that fast. Right, so this is the difference between experts and novices across the sports board, right? This ability to anticipate what's coming. And so this wasn't hardware. This was software that's downloaded. This is a learned skill, right, that people learn through specific kinds of practice. Barry Bonds couldn't hit Jenny Finch because he hadn't put in his 10,000 hours against softball pitchers, right? We've heard of the 10,000 hour rule, everybody, I'm pretty sure, right? Good, so we don't have to explain it. What you think about it depends on where you've encountered it, but the most popular notion that the people that you deal with will have is that there is no such thing as hardware in sports. It's all software, right? What looks like innate ability is actually just the accumulation of practice. And part of that idea comes from the fact that these perceptual differences run across the sports world. I want to show you a recreation of a famous sports science study. In this first part, a decent amateur soccer player named Ronald is going to try to connect with he's going to try to head a corner kick into the goal when the lights are turned out. So take a look at how he does here.
Dark! Light!
So what does the night vision reveal? Ronald misses the ball by quite a way. Perhaps not that surprising.
Right, not that surprising because the lights are turned out. It's hard to connect with the ball. Let's see how a slightly better football player does at this same task.
Dark! Light!
Aye, that's one straight in the back.
The night vision replay shows how differently Ronaldo performs.
Okay, so Cristiano Ronaldo didn't need to see the ball, right? He only needed to anticipate based on the early trajectory, the movements of the kicker, right? And that's, Cristiano Ronaldo is very strong. He's, you know, he's like allergic to wearing a shirt, so we all know that. I would be too. No criticism. Very fast, right? But that has nothing to do with strength or speed or with being a ridiculously good-looking underwear model, right? That's pure perceptual expertise. And this isn't just something that occurs in the sports world. In fact, it was discovered outside of sports, in chess. In the 1940s, in a series of famous experiments, chess players of different ability levels were given boards, and then the boards were taken away, and they were asked to recreate them as best they could. Grandmaster chess players could recreate an entire board after seeing it for 3 seconds. That's a really difficult task. So naturally, the researchers concluded grandmaster chess players have photographic memories, and so for about 2 generations, they would recruit for who to train to be a grandmaster chess player based on memory tests, right? Pretty practical application. And then 2 generations later, these studies were repeated, including by the psychologist Herbert Simon, who I'm sure students will find if you turn over 3 stones in modern psychology, Herbert Simon's behind one of them. And in this case, a wrinkle was added. The players were also given board arrangements that looked real to a non-chess expert like me, but would never actually occur in a game. Something about the arrangement of pieces could not have occurred in a chess game, and in that case, the grandmasters were stripped of that photographic memory. They were just like the novices. In fact, the grandmaster chess players had never had photographic memories at all. They had just learned how to chunk groups of chess pieces the way that Barry Bonds had learned how to chunk body movements, so that they weren't remembering 28 different things. They were remembering a smaller number of groups that had a relation to one another. And we all use this kind of chunking in things in which we are expert. And I want to prove it to you. Okay, so you're going to get your grandmaster chess experiment now. If you're listening to me, you are an expert in the English language, right? In fact, you've probably learned it more thoroughly than maybe anything you'll ever learn. So I'm going to give you 20 English words in 10 seconds. I want you to memorize as many as you can. Okay, ready? set, and you guys better do well because a lot of you should know like mnemonic techniques and stuff like that. So I expect to be impressed. Ready? Go. Okay, you got all those, right? Of course you did. So now you've had a practice round. I'll give you one more try. 20 English words, 10 seconds. Memorize as many as you can. See if you can do a little better. Ready, set, go. Okay, do better that time? If not, there's something wrong with you. As I'm sure you realized pretty quickly, those were the same 20 English words. Those are the same 20 pieces of data. But because of the order in which they're arranged in the second condition, you probably within the first second or two could almost immediately grab meaning from that second arrangement because you've learned a system of grammar and chunks of words and phrases that allow you to almost immediately make order out of chaos otherwise, right? And you learned this like a baby. You were immersed first, and then you learned grammar later, which one of the problems I perceive in youth sports these days is that we try to teach the grammar first and all the other stuff later, but that notwithstanding. So you learned the English language, right, unconsciously with chunking. So had you put in your 10,000 hours against the best softball pitchers in the world or Major League Baseball hitters, you too could have been like Barry Bonds, maybe not as strong, but with that expertise, right? That's the promise of the 10,000 hour rule. So everyone had heard of the rule. How many people have read the primary sources that it stems from? A couple, yeah. Great, some. So it's mainly based on the work of a psychologist at Florida State named K. Anders Ericsson, and actually he's been really upset by the public portrayal of his work that is in the heads of all of the people that you work with, and perhaps many of you yourselves, so much so that he put a letter on his faculty webpage, the title of which I think speaks for itself, The Danger of Delegating Education to Journalists. Ouch. So why was he so upset? I think there are a lot of reasons, but there are two things I want to emphasize about those original studies. First of all, the 10,000 hour rule mainly came from a study of 30 violinists, the 10 best of whom had practiced 10,000 hours on average by the time they were 20 in deliberate practice. But these people were already in a world-famous music academy, right? So this represents a very pervasive issue in research called restriction of range problem, right? They were so highly pre-screened, they were already in a world-famous music academy. So this is like me, if I want to do a study about what causes basketball skill using only NBA centers in my subject set, noticing they'd all practiced a lot and therefore declaring that only practice got them where they are, not practice plus being 7 feet tall, because I've restricted the range of my subjects. In fact, if you were in the United States, there's a very strong positive relationship between height and points scored in the NBA, but if you restrict your subject range to only the NBA, it becomes negative. So you'd give parents the advice to have short children to have them score a lot of points in the NBA. The other problem was 10,000 hours was just an average, and there was no measure of variance included in any of these papers, so by its nature, it obscured individual differences. Right? In chess, for example, to learn all the chunks, you need to learn maybe 300,000 chunks to become a grandmaster, but to become an international master, it takes about 11,053 hours on average to learn the number of chunks you need. But some people learn each chunk a little bit faster. Some people have made it there in 3,000 hours. Some people are being tracked, have passed 25,000 hours, and they still haven't made it. And so you have an 11,053 hour rule, but it doesn't really tell you much about the reality of human variation. So I've coined a phrase that I think is much more accurately reflective of the breadth of skill acquisition literature. I call it the 10,000 hours plus or minus 10,000 hours rule. I'm sure that's going to catch on like wildfire. It turns out that for Major League Baseball, for example, so you don't, right? Think of, I mentioned hardware and software. Think of your computer. Your computer, you could have the best hardware in the world, doesn't do anything unless you have the right software. But once you have the right software, the hardware you have makes a ton of difference to how good a machine you have. So we've been thinking about talent the wrong way. In Major League Baseball, there's, for example, a host of visual skills, some of which are very trainable and some of which are not, that are important for picking up those chunks as early as possible once you've learned them, right? So my corrected vision is 20/20. I see from 20 feet away what a normal person sees from 20 feet away. Major League Baseball hitters on average can't be tested on like the commercially available tests because their average visual acuity is 20/12. So they see from 20 feet away what I stand at 12 feet away to see. So once they've learned those chunks, The quicker they can pick them up, the better. So the reality is that there's a ton of human variation. To me, the way that some of the 10,000-hour rule type stuff has been interpreted really smacks of like the height of Taylorism, or scientific management in the industrial era, where the idea was there is one best way to do everything for everyone, just plug them in. And I think that's exactly the opposite of what most of the sports science is saying. And so I want to tell a story about that individual variation I call the tale of two high jumpers. This guy on the left, Swedish guy, Stefan Holm, age 6, inspired by seeing jumping on television, went and built a set in his backyard, and it became a way of bonding with his father. The guy on the right is a jumper who became his rival, a Bahamian named Donald Thomas. Now, Stefan was good but not great, and this is a high jump, frankly. Like, you either got it or you don't. But he really loved it, and it really became a way for him to sort of tinker with the equipment with his dad, and he loved it. He fell in love, and he stuck with it. And he improved 1 centimeter per year for 20 straight years. And in a sport where you either have it or you don't, Stefan transformed himself into the ultimate have, and in 2004, he became the Olympic champion. And Stefan is about 5'10" and a half, and he cleared a bar a hair under 8 feet. So he tied the record for the highest clearance over one's own head. And Stefan has all these traits that we idealize in elite athletes. The first time I ever talked to Stefan, I was just making small talk, and I asked like if he was dating anyone, and he goes, "High jump is my girlfriend, I can't cheat on her." Like, pretty intense. And the last time I paid him a visit in Sweden, he had locked his own equipment away from himself. And he has a young son now, and his son's name is Melvin, which is not a popular Swedish name, but his wife liked the name Melvin, and Stefan insisted that Win be somewhere in the kid's name. Sure, there's going to be no pressure on that kid. Future client for someone. Donald traveled a slightly different path. Donald was a student at a small college in Missouri called Lindenwood, and he was talking trash about how good an athlete he was one day at lunch, and the best high jumper on the track team, a guy named Carlos, overheard him and said, like, "You're talking all that smack. Like, you don't know what it's like to be in a real competition. You wouldn't even clear a bar of 6'6", which is not exactly going out on a limb, right? That's not an easy clearance. But Donald says, "Well, yes, I would." So Carlos goes and sets up a bar in the field house. Donald gets his sneakers and comes in there and takes 7 steps and clears it. So 6'8", which is Carlos's school record. Donald moves back a little bit, clears it. 6'10", Donald clears it. 7 feet, Donald clears 7 feet. At which point Carlos stops him because he's worried he's going to get hurt. Takes him over to the coach and says, "Coach, we have a 7-foot high jumper." The coach doesn't believe it at first. Then he picks up the phone, calls the next meet at Eastern Illinois that you see here. You can see it was such a late entry. Donald doesn't have a uniform. Probably not the shorts I would pick for high jumping. And you see his sneakers. And you see in this picture on the right, just a little blur, he's got his arms behind him because he's not used to that feeling of falling backward. He's coming down from 7'5.5" there. New field house record. Donald, soon thereafter, turns professional. And who does he meet at the World Championships but Stefan Holm? Here's Stefan displaying the perfect high jump form, right? The curl. And the reason that's such a useful form is because his center of mass is in the middle of the donut. So his center of mass is actually passing under the bar while he's passing over. One of the things, like, that's like perfect, right? It's like his heels are whispering a secret in his ear there. It's like beautiful. One of the things I find fascinating about this too is that this form, right, like, it's so obvious from a physics perspective why it works, but everyone was, and scientists say, like physiologists and things say in retrospect, well, of course it works. But at the time, everyone was telling Nick Fosbury, like, this is crazy, you can't do this. So many of the innovations really come from athlete experimentation, which I think is something to be fostered. So, perfect form, Stefan. Donald, on the other hand, like, how did I get up here? He's looking back at, how am I going to get down? That is the worst high jump form I've ever seen in a professional. And I thought it was kind of funny. It looked like he could be riding like an invisible deck chair through the air, So I tried to put one under him. It fits like really well. Also, for any track nerds like me, you'll notice he's wearing pole vault shoes. But so what happens at this World Championship? It's great. If you go on YouTube and watch the announcements, they're going through the starting line. Everyone's standing there all stoically, and they're like, "Stefan Holm, blah, 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 Olympic champion." And then they go to Donald, and they go, "And Donald Thomas, very much an unknown quantity." And what happens? But Donald becomes the world champion. I had a chance to talk to Donald after this. I said, so what do you think? Like, because I'm a big track enthusiast. Like, what do you think about, high jump? He goes, kind of boring. Which is not the quote you're probably going to see in the newspaper from a world champion. So here are two guys in a very simple, straightforward sport that got there by completely opposite paths. Right? After this competition, scientists spent some time examining Donald and Stefan, found some really interesting differences between them. Particularly, I thought the most interesting were in their Achilles tendons, right? It's like a spring in the back of your leg that stretches and compresses to shoot you into the air, which is why when you take a drop step, you can get a better jump because you're stretching that spring. And Stefan, through his years of training, through progressively stressing that left Achilles tendon, had hardened it so much that it takes 1.8 tons of force to stretch his left Achilles tendon 1 centimeter. Right? If you remember your spring mechanics from high school, you can store a lot of energy in a spring by making it very tight or by making it very long. Donald just happened to be born with a spring that should have been on a guy 6 inches taller. Right? And so these two guys, totally opposite paths, very different physiology, but basically getting to the same place. Donald would have crushed the world record if he had good form, by the way. He recorded the highest center of mass jump ever. But the interesting thing with Donald is now he's been a pro for about 8 years, and he has not improved 1 centimeter. Okay, so he entered at the top. He's actually gone backward. He contradicts the 10,000-hour rule from every direction. Right? Stefan estimated his own lifetime practice, deliberate practice, at 20,000 hours. Donald's close to 0, so average 10,000 hours. Right? But so Donald, I think a real mistake was made by his coaches. He contradicts the 10,000-hour rule from every direction. Right? He started on top and he's gotten worse. His coaches took him and said, like, wow, we have a near 8-foot high jumper here. Like, let's start training him like an Olympian. But Donald was a talented guy who had no development under him and was hurt and hurt and hurt and hurt progressively. Right? They treated him as if he was as good as his height jumping when he really wasn't. And he had sort of found a way to develop his own unique jumping style where he almost stopped when he came up to the bar and really stretched that Achilles tendon. But, so Donald's an oddball, right, to come in at that level. I mean, I'd be surprised if I saw a kid at a state high school championship do something like that. Because we know the elite athletes spend more time in deliberate practice, right? But that's what it looks like anyway when we only factor in cross-sectional retrospective studies. But in cases where longitudinal data is put together, it actually looks like this. The athletes who go on to become elite spend less time in deliberate practice in their eventual sport early in life than the athletes who plateau at lower levels, right? When Tiger Woods went on television and as a 2-year-old and displayed his golf skills, it ignited a craze that every development would now be based on Tiger Woods. And it turns out that that is actually the vast exception in sports. And I would argue that golf is a uniquely poor model of skill acquisition for almost anything else that humans want to learn. Right? Totally non-dynamic task, doesn't rely on any teammates. Basically, it is like a scientific management industrial, tons of cognitive skills. I'm not degrading it at all. I'm a horrible golfer, so it's not saying it's easy. But it is a scientific management task. You're trying to just minimize variance, basically, in your strokes. The norm is not Tiger, it's the Roger Federer. Roger played a bunch of sports as a kid. When he wanted to focus, his mother, a tennis coach who refused to coach him, forced him to continue playing badminton, basketball, and soccer if he wanted to keep playing tennis. That's the norm. Steve Nash. I like to use him because he's a normal-sized guy. I think he's listed like 6 feet. I stood next to him, no chance. NBA MVP, didn't play basketball till he was 13 years old. Didn't play basketball until he was 13. Played a variety of sports, gained a variety of athletic skills, figure out what works for him. When he started basketball, he said it felt like finding a new friend. Right? He was fresh coming to it. I was watching the Cubs in the playoffs last night and remembering that I talked to Ben Zobrist once. The only sport that Ben Zobrist went to state in high school, he was the World Series MVP last year, was cross country. Right? These athletes, the normal pattern is actually having a sampling period where you gain a variety of skills, test out a range of different sports, and specialize later. Right? It's not the golf, it's the Roger, not the Tiger. And this turns out to be the case in areas where people have really forgotten about it, right? Other than sports, I'd say music is probably the place where the kind of 10,000-hour scientific management thinking most manifests, right? Got to start early in music. Except that's not really what it says either if you aggregate studies of reasonably high quality. So these are practice hours for students at world-famous music academies. You can see the students that were deemed exceptional don't start practicing more than the students deemed average until their third instrument. And in fact, they go on to sample about twice as many instruments. Whereas the average students more typically had this experience where someone said, okay, they started on an instrument, maybe they want to try something else now, but it's like, you know, you've got a head start in this other one, you can't really switch now, or you'll get behind, even though that's what all the exceptional students end up doing. Switching to one that suits them better, that they like more after gaining a range of skills. So I think there's some areas of the sports world that have taken note of this that looks very different from the kind of Taylorism of the 10,000-hour rule, and have made use of it. Here are the last 4 countries before Rio. I got to travel and spend time reporting in all these countries. I haven't added Rio because I haven't gone there and reported enough to have insight into what they were doing. But these are the number of medals they won at the Olympics before they hosted. And I've done reporting on this in all these countries. 3 of these countries looked at this kind of science and started what they called talent transfer programs, which basically meant if they had someone in their pipeline that they didn't think was going to be a medalist or maybe wasn't going to make the national team, instead of just kicking them out, said, maybe, you know, you've got athleticism, maybe you should try something else before we kick you out. Greece didn't have that. Here's the number of medals those countries won when they hosted. Australia and the UK both produced gold medalists out of this, right? The most dominant athlete in the world right now is a woman named Helen Glover, who's a rower who had tried a whole variety of sports and got a chance to try rowing for the first time 4 years before the London Olympics, had never rowed a stroke 4 years before the London Olympics, won the first gold medal for the home team. She's now been rowing for 9 years and has been undefeated for the last 6, I believe. In Australia, they also produced gold medalists out of theirs. They had one woman who won the aerial skiing, had done a whole bunch of other sports. Nothing fit her perfectly, but turned out she was really good at twisting in the air. She was such a poor skier when she won the Olympic gold medal that when she won and they said, you know, ski down the mountain to the gold medal winner's press conference, she like fell and rolled down the mountain to get that. Right, so this sampling period, they set up sampling for adults. Said maybe you don't have to have been doing everything you did forever. Maybe you can try to fit in something else and it works really well. Why does it work so well? I think there are a number of reasons, but one of them I think has to do with the way that athletes' bodies have changed over time. Okay, I had a bunch of German physical education journals from the first half of the 20th century translated, and you keep seeing this phrase called the perfect form of man they keep talking about, right? It meant only men, it meant only white men, it meant only white men of medium height and medium weight. And so that showed in athletes' bodies. At the time, the average elite high jumper and average elite shot putter were the same size, because the idea was there's a perfect body form and everything else is a deviation by accident. And so that showed up in athletes' bodies. And then, of course, for reasons you can imagine, German sports science became less influential in the latter half of the 20th century. And people started doing real sports science, and coaches realized instead of this average body type, you actually want people that fit into specific niches, and that shows in athletes' bodies. So today, the average elite shot putter is 3.5 inches taller and 130 pounds heavier than the average elite high jumper. And this shows across the sports spectrum. So this is a data point for each of 24 sports in the early half of the 20th century, just on height versus mass, never mind all the traits that aren't as visible as that. And you can see there's some dispersal, but it groups kind of around that you know, sort of medium build. And if you plot a data point for each of these same 24 sports today, it looks like this. The athletes' bodies have gotten much more different from one another. And because this looks like the charts that show the galaxies flying away from one another in the expanding universe, the Australian scientists who discovered it call it the Big Bang of body types. Right? In sports where height is prized, like basketball, when the sport went international in the mid-'80s, over the course of 2 seasons, the proportion of men in the NBA who are at least 7 feet tall doubled, more than doubled, from 5% to 11%, as the search for these special bodies went global. So today, about 1 in 10 men in the NBA are at least 7 feet tall. But as you might imagine, a 7-foot-tall human is very rare in the normal population, more rare than you think. True shoes-off 7-footer is so rare that if you know an American man who's at least 7 feet tall between the ages of 20 and 40, there's a 17% chance he's a current NBA player. Right? So you find 6 honest 7-footers, most of them listed on the rosters are not, and one of them is currently in the NBA. And once that competitive advantage plateaued, then bodies changed in other ways. This is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian man, the ideal proportions, arm span equal to height. Arm span's actually usually a touch longer than height. Mine's exactly equal, so I'm a little short-winged. But if Leonardo had wanted to draw the Vitruvian NBA player, he would have needed a rectangle and an ellipse because the average NBA player is 6'6" with arms that are 7 feet long. Right? So the average NBA player meets the diagnostic criteria for Marfan syndrome, the elongation of the limbs, the average. So in sports where large stature was prized, large athletes got larger as global competition became more intense. Conversely, in sports where diminutive stature is an advantage, these small athletes got smaller. So the average elite female gymnast has shrunk from 5'3" to a Simone Bilesian 4'9" over the last 30 years. And the large got larger, the small smaller, and the weird got weirder. Hey, that's not nice. Don't laugh at Michael Phelps. So Michael Phelps, greatest swimmer in history, obviously. The man next to him is Hicham El Guerrouj, Moroccan man who holds the world record in the mile, 3:43, if you haven't been keeping track. And in swimming, you want a long torso and short legs. It's like the long hull of a canoe for speed over the water, right? And in running, you want exactly the opposite. You want like stilts with some billows on top of them, basically. Yeah. And because of the body types that are advantaged in these sports, it shows in these athletes. So these two guys, who are 7 inches difference in height, wear the exact same length inseam on their pants. Right? And this has happened all over sports. I got a chance to see some selection in China, which was really neat for diving. Chinese diving is like the greatest dynasty you've ever heard of. Like they had a world championship where no Chinese diver lost to a diver from any other country in anything. And you see these kids, and they've decided that if their elbow joints don't fold in above their head, they'll make too big a splash on the water. So there's kids holding their arms up, and there's someone going down a row going like, you, out, 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 go to gymnastics. And for me, I'm kind of like, whoa, they're going to like lock them in padded cells now or something? Couldn't be further from the case. They figured out a physiological measure that they think matters. I don't know how well it's validated or not. But after that, like nobody has more fun than the Chinese diving team. So they combine this early selection that they think works with these other tenets of what I think the research shows, that you need to develop general athleticism and do sort of things that the athletes won't eventually do in competition. And a friend of mine gave me some video that I kind of edited down of training at the Chinese diving team, an American coach who was helping them. So I just want to show you that because I think it's really cool and you don't get to see it very often. So here's the facility. They have the athletes of all levels. One of the things they have learned from sports psychology is that feedback should either be pretty quick or not at all. So they put a screen right in the back of, right, as we know as sports psychologists, the annual work evaluation is pretty useless for improving people. Like if you have to decide to fire them, maybe it's useful, but it's not useful for actual improvement. So if they want to promote self-regulatory learning, they have to make the feedback pretty quick, right? And so you can see they're either going to do it quickly or they're basically not going to do it at all. And everyone in this picture, you can't tell, but there are people who are just beginners and there are also people who are the best in the world at what they do in this same facility. They're also remarkably laid back, right? Like after seeing the selection, it wouldn't give you a sense of what the tenor of the actual training facility is. So now take a look at this next part. Here you see right in front of some young guys who haven't made the team yet is the 4-time gold medalist practicing fundamentals. Right? Like not a lot of ego flowing through that place, at least visibly. There they are, I think that's a pretty good example. Look at them, they're just sitting right there watching one of the best in the world. And conversely, here's someone who has not proven themselves yet, really pushing the envelope, world's first backward arm stand triple somersault. And this is someone who is not nearly at that highest level yet, and whammo. But what happens? The team comes to the pool and gives a standing ovation. Right? A lot of the stuff they do could never even be scored in a competition. They're just encouraged to experiment. And there's a ton of fun. They learn general athletic skills. They spend most of their time. When they want them to do something that's just fitness, they take advantage of their competitive spirit and turn it into a contest, like this. Right? They're all forced to learn lots of different skills. They have some say and some autonomy over what they do when they're doing their weight training. So they make a big effort to make things seem like they are connected to what they actually do in their sport. If anybody's seen the longitudinal study of the Oklahoma State football team, notice that over 4 years of a great strength training program, people got a lot stronger and know better at what they do on the field, which is a bit of a problem. So they have some say in how to design what they do so that it feels connected, right? In fitness, they just got to get tired. Do whatever you want. So I thought this kid was funny. And then they learn like circus skills and stuff. You know, juggling, general athleticism. So I thought this was a really neat combination of being forced to do some early selection, but then also embracing what I think is the emerging picture from sports science, that actually people need to learn these general skills and have some autonomy in what they're doing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my own sampling period in sports. This is me in college when my lower to upper body weight ratio was a little better than it is now. I was a walk-on 800-meter runner, which, as you know, means I wasn't good enough to get recruited. And I was paired with this guy as my training partner, a guy named Scott, who was already on the Canadian national team. So you can see him wearing his Canada kit. We're both 800-meter runners. And the coach at the time was a fan of the hallowed practice of putting the walk-on with the blue chip recruit so that the walk-on doesn't come back in about a week or two. So Scott was 20 seconds faster than I was in the half mile when we were both juniors in high school, right? 20 seconds. Like, if you see two people on the same track that far apart, you hide your eyes from your own embarrassment just for being there watching. But whatever, I stuck with it for whatever reason, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to quit a lot of times, but I liked the guys on the team, mainly, is why. And one sort of thing that allowed me to stay on and I didn't have to quit was because since I was a walk-on, so little attention was paid to anything I was doing. If I was so burned I couldn't make a practice, I just didn't, or I just dropped out early if I had to, and nobody cared, right? And so for the first 2 years, I had the, kind of blessing in disguise of not having to score at any meets because nobody cared what I was doing. So I didn't have to race as much, or I didn't have to make sure my training was perfect, and so I started experimenting with myself. I started just keeping detailed logs and trying different things and seeing what worked for me in recovery and seeing what I thought worked for me in training. And when I hit on something that I thought that worked for me, I started improving very rapidly. And I started gaining on Scott, and he stuck where he was. And at about 1 minute and 52 seconds, way down from where I'd been in high school, I beat him, and he never beat me again. And I kept getting faster, and he stagnated. It was a super interesting experience because, coaches and teammates gave us these interesting narratives like, oh, you're the walk-on, keep improving, like no talent, so tough. So then I'm like, okay, cool. Which was interesting because I knew I was doing less work than him because I couldn't tolerate his workload, right? Whereas Scott, it was all the talent in the world, not improving, head case. I actually don't think he was a head case until he started getting a personal pep talk from the coach right before every race, which is a little tricky, okay? So I knew something was wrong with this because I wasn't working harder than him, but I wasn't going to be the one to sort of step up and negate this flattering narrative, right? Because it led to all this cool stuff for me. Like I won my university's award for the athlete who achieved significant athletic success in the face of unusual challenge and difficulty. My unusual challenge and difficulty just being that I stunk at first. So I always kind of thought there was something wrong with this, but I didn't exactly know what it was until I got the chance to report my book. Don't pay too close attention to this. I should have made this slide prettier, sorry. But these are some results from the most famous exercise genetics study of all time. In this segment of the study, this study has produced 150 papers in itself. In this segment of the study, every member of 2 generations of 98 families were put on identical cycling training, sedentary families, 6 months of identical cycling training, all controlled in the lab for specific effort. So it took 5 university centers and 4 years to gather the data. And the point of this part was to look at improvement in aerobic capacity, the amount of blood, oxygen you can move through your bloodstream when you're going full tilt. Important predictor of endurance for non-elites particularly, and very important predictor of mortality. And as you can see, there's a normal curve here. Some people improved like crazy. Some people didn't improve at all. I think there's a little measurement error there. I doubt it's less than they got worse, but whatever. They didn't improve much. Most people somewhere in the middle, and families stuck together, right? Like crazy. Identical twins were 9 times more similar than fraternal twins. And these scientists then found a gene expression signature that could predict part of who would respond to this kind of training even before they undertook it, right? So their improvement, some people who had a certain gene expression signature improved the amount of oxygen they could move 3 times as much as people on the lower end on identical training. So their improvement was mediated by their biology, but what I thought was even more fascinating was the correlation between ability at baseline and ability to improve was 0. So on day 1 of the study, the scientists said, here are 10 most talented people, missed 100% of the people that looked the most talented at the end. How different of a conception of talent is that than what we're used to, right? There's no blanket statement. It turns out that it's very skill dependent. Some skills, there's a high correlation between baseline ability to improve. Some it's low, and some it's none. None whatsoever. And even more interestingly, I think when they changed the training program, the training modality, the people who were the high and low responders changed, right? And they respond in different ways. So just like you know, the American College of Sports Medicine says exercise is medicine. I'm not even sure they knew how true that is, right? Just like I might need 3 Tylenol, well, you only need 1 because of our genes involved in acetaminophen metabolism are different. The same thing goes for this kind of training. So for me, what happened in these years that I had to experiment was simply just learning who I was as an athlete. And I titled this talk, Dante had Virgil and athletes have you, because I think the single most important thing that can come out of sports is helping someone figure out who they are. There's no scientific way to give somebody that 0.5%. What you can do is walk the path with them as they try to learn about themselves, right? And like Dante, you know, is in the Inferno, it's a parable he faces in the form of wild animals, his own fears and his own failings. And Virgil comes to him and says, I'm going to walk with you while we face these worst fears. And by the time we get to the lowest level of the Inferno, I will have equipped you with enough that I can't go with you anymore, and then it's your turn to go on your own and find out about yourself. And that, to me, is the journey of an athlete who figures out who they are internally. I was the classic low baseline, high responder, so I'm in horrible, I get winded walking up the steps when I'm not training. So I was so bad when I started out, I went to get examined by a pulmonologist, and they said my results were consistent with earliest stages of emphysema, right? This is less than 2 years before I became university record holder. Not anymore, but at the time. I assume most people that get results like that don't continue with it. And after this, after I realized kind of unconsciously that I had to personalize my training, then I started donating all sorts of my time and body parts to science so I could learn more about myself. And it turns out that I have a lot more type 2 muscle than the average 800-meter runner, so I just couldn't do the volume that I was doing before. So I was better on 35 miles a week than I had been on 80 miles a week. So first I had to have a sampling period. I played football, basketball, and baseball in high school. I'm sure you're all surprised I didn't make it to the NBA despite my wingspan. But then I had time to figure out the sport where I fit and the type of training that worked for me. I had a sampling period. And I think talking about this 0.5% stuff is basically nonsense before you've had any chance to even learn who you are. And I think there are a lot of pressures to try to make people figure out who they are before they've really had it. And we figure out who we are in practice, not in theory. And I think there are a lot of pressures that are forcing the opposite, not just in sports, but in the world in general, for people to try to figure out who they are purely by introspection rather than by trying things. Once they've figured out where they fit, then I think you can start talking about this 0.5%. How do you get this little margin, right? That depends who you ask. Anybody want to be really brave and guess what these 3 things have in common? Champagne, razor blades, diapers. Anyway, I had to use Creative Commons license. That's why it's a 2012 champagne bottle. These 3 things, if you buy these 3 things in like a convenience store, you'll be flagged in a database somewhere for credit card fraud, possible credit card fraud. Turns out to be an incredibly common purchase pattern of identity thieves. Apparently, champagne and razor blades are easy to flip on the black market, and they buy diapers because it makes them seem non-threatening when they go to checkout. I don't have kids, but I would think the opposite. If I had kids, I'd be more likely to be stealing somebody's identity. But this pattern was discovered by a man named Vivek Ranadive. It's classic big data success. Reams of credit card purchases, reams of known identity theft, cross-reference, you know, a little more complicated than that, answer emerges. So Vivek likes to say, math is more important than science now. I don't need to know anything about anything. I don't need to know anything about how human beings work because I just have enough data and that will tell me the answers. Vivek got really good at this kind of stuff. So good that he bought himself a congratulatory present, the Sacramento Kings of the NBA. And like a lot of people who are moving into positions of influence in sports, he made his fortune in big data, and so he has tremendous faith in big data to be able to help solve the human problems as well. And so he's applied that to the Sacramento Kings, and if you follow the NBA, you know about how well that's been working out. Which is to say not at all, because I'm a firm believer that you still need to know things and about human beings, and that big data will not solve most of these problems. It's a very specific type of problem that big data solves. The better solutions that I've seen are what I want to call small data, and this is kind of the last point I'll make here. And to give an example of what I mean by small data, I'm going to use UK sport. They started what they called the Determinants of Performance program in the lead up to the Olympics. What matters to the outcome of a specific sport? They started with the most simple sport they could think of, shot put. 3 variables that matter, period. Release velocity, release height, and release angle. That's it. So they said, well, how do these 3 things play out in practice? They looked at a competition between the 2 best people in the world. So the guy who got second had a higher release height. The guy who got second had a better release velocity, which is what people spend their time working on, you know, strength and form. But he threw 1.5 degree lower angle. The guy who got the gold threw 1.5 degree higher angle and won the gold medal. Now, what if that guy who got silver had thrown 1 degree higher? then he would have thrown 72 4.5 instead of 70 feet 11 inches, and he would have alchemized that silver into gold. So they applied this lesson and said, well, what's the next easiest sport? Long jump. So they got a PhD biomechanist, of which there are precious few in the world, gave her the title of horizontal jumps specialist. 3 variables: speed into the runway, force into the jumping board, angle of the jump. That's it. Which of those could she change? Everyone, people, if they are track enthusiasts, know that people spend their time at the top level training jump form, force into the board, weights and force in the board. She realized that actually there wasn't a ton of variance there, and it's very hard to change. Sprint speed at that level, very hard to change. This sport is more than a century old, even in its modern form. Nobody that I know of has ever worked on jump angle. And this woman said, maybe I should try working on that because it doesn't seem like it's very easy to change this other stuff. And she found she could change that very quickly with obstacles above and below the jumper. And so after a century of nobody doing it, she said, well, let me not just find out the things that matter, but which of those can I actually do something about, right? Important tenet in sports psychology. Which of these things can I actually do anything about? And she worked with Great Britain's best jumper just on jump angle. Come the Olympics, he doesn't have one of the 5 fastest approaches or highest forces into the board, jumps at the best angle, wins the gold medal. So there was a case of taking a guy who maybe wasn't one of the best handful of athletes physiologically in the world in his sport, and by focusing not just on the things that mattered, but which of those she could actually do something about, given the amount of time she had with her athlete, and finding that 0.5% and turning him into a world and Olympic champion. So now, just to close, rather than the Tiger Woods model of deciding who you're going to be, it's called the end of history illusion. I bet everyone here, I've asked if you've changed a lot in the past, you would raise your hand and say, yes, I have, but you think you're a finished product now. It's super interesting. People are willing to pay, they'll pay, if I ask you now, you'll pay $130 on average to see your favorite band now in 10 years, but in 10 years, you'll only pay $80 to see your favorite band from 10 years ago. So the real way that, there are a million ways to get to elite performance, but the most typical path is actually a sampling period, and only then, much later, finding out the things that matter and the things you can change. I love this quote from J.M. Tanner, world's expert in body growth and development, and himself was a world-class athlete. Everyone has a different genotype, therefore for optimal development, everyone should have a different environment. I came across it reading about genetics. Never mind that. Fill in whatever word you want for genotype. Everyone has different motivations. Everyone has different support system. Everyone has different strengths. Everyone has different desires. Therefore, for optimal development, everyone should have a different environment. And as Virgils, what I think your incredibly important task is to help people learn about their own inimitable selves as they walk that path of self-learning, is to go hand in hand with them. You can't tell someone how to be the best in the world. You can walk the path with them as they optimize that environment for their own unique abilities and proclivities. And with that, I want to thank you very much. And I have a couple minutes for questions. And actually, can you flip that back on? Because depending on questions that are asked, I have a couple things I might throw up. So I have a couple, 5 minutes for questions if anyone has questions. Doesn't have to be, can be about anything. But also I can't see, so. No, shy? Yes. Sorry, wait for me to go to the microphone.
You wrote some in ProPublica on doping in sport,
Yeah.
particularly in track and field. And when you look at this kind of unique environment, those things that are legal versus those things that aren't legal, the risk factors to long-term health, where are you in that position right now? Could you just comment on that a little bit?
In that position, do you mean about the risks to long-term health or the state of doping in the sport?
Yeah, but, well, I'm interested in two things.
Okay.
One, are these governing bodies going to be able to really catch up to science and be able to enforce properly? That's one question. And then the other element to this is when people are self-selecting to determine what they will or what they won't do long-term, short-term in decision-making for their health. what do you think is going to happen with that?
Good question. So for the first one, the science. So for most of doping history, since there's been testing at all, the technology would improve, and yet the rate of positives would stay at about between 1% and 2% every year. So it seemed like the cats and the mice were basically in technological lockstep with one another. For the first time ever, I have some confidence that that's actually getting better with the biological passport. And the reason I say that is not because I'm naive about it, but I was, in some of my reporting at ProPublica, privy to some clandestine recordings of the Russian doping operation. And if people remember that story, part of the operation, or if they saw Icarus, was cutting a hole in the wall and sneaking urine samples out, right? I'm sure that person's mother was extremely proud. And the reason they were doing that is so low tech. Instead of just settling with microdosing or adding epitestosterone to testosterone to confound the test, was because they were actually getting pinged by the biological passport more often than they had expected. And so they had to come up with a low-tech mechanism. And so I think that for the first time we've actually made some real technological progress. The problem is that biological passport is based on blood fluctuations, that are statistically unlikely. So 100% we're going to have some false positives. You can't not have false positives without that. And the other thing is the bar has to be set really high. So you're knowingly letting some people go through who have really abnormal tests and are probably doping, but not enough to sanction them. That said, those people then start to get targeted. And so I think for the first time ever, by saving these longitudinal tests, right? Like Lance Armstrong, in all his hubris, when he made his comeback and decided to post all his drug tests online, say, like, I've never failed one, people like me looked at it and were like, that is the signature of a biological passport positive, what was going on there longitudinally. So I don't think, not nearly catching everybody, but for the first time making legitimate technological progress. In terms of the trade-offs with health, by the way, that old Goldman study that says like some huge portion of athletes, if you said you can take this drug and win everything, but you'll die in 5 years, would say yes. I tried to track that down. The only thing I could track it down to was him saying it in Sports Illustrated a long time. And when people have attempted to, he's now like, he then became part of this, like a big shot in this legalized HGH movement. Odd guy. And he, I could find no real basis of that work ever having been done or published or peer-reviewed, not saying he didn't, but when there were attempts to replicate it, that was not the case. It was a very small percentage of people who decided they would do that. That said, you only need a small percentage of people at the top level, but I think by far the most important tool is culture, is group culture and accountability. The technology is never going to be perfect unless you want to have a ton of false positives. You're not going to catch everyone. So I think this culture and accountability to one another and to the sport is something that is underutilized, frankly, and that I think people in this room can play a really big part in making our sports more about what we say they should be ideally, right, and not just giving lip service to. So I think the tech will do what the tech's going to do, but I think we should really start thinking about the cultural components, because I happen to think they are incredibly powerful when it comes to social disapproval of engaging in those sorts of things, personally. So I think that's the frontier for me, not the technology. Yep.
First off, what a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think you're in the same category with Maxwell.
With who?
Gladwell.
Oh. He's my...
Yes.
We have a lot of arguments, and we became running buddies, so we argue a lot on our own time.
I'd love to see you in competition together.
You can see us arguing on YouTube if you do 10,000 hours versus the sports gene, but it's not really an argument. Like, we agree on a lot of stuff. He's about a world-class miler for his age group, by the way. He's 50 years old and runs like 450-something in the mile. So.
Wow.
But I'm younger, so I can still,
Exactly. So to summarize your presentation, would it be called thinking outside the box, especially with your own personal history?
Well, I think it kind of depends. To me, I think there's a little bit more, rather than thinking outside of the box, is figuring out where the box should be in the first place, right? Because I think there's a ton of evidence that this sort of sampling in all walks of life is incredibly important. And so, like, whenever I'm at a graduation speech for something, there's always the core of the speech is don't give up. Right? Don't give up on your dreams. And I think what the speakers really mean to say is don't become demoralized by the world. I don't think they mean to say it the way that it's often received, which is whatever I think I should be doing now, I'm a failure if I give up on that. And so I think the problem for a lot of younger people particularly is attempting to define the box when they don't have the skills or the means to do that. And so for me, I would hold off on even making the box for a little while.
So essentially, you're really talking about awareness.
Awareness, but I think those are real tangible skills that people are not born with, how to learn from the things that they themselves do, right? And there's a very powerful industry, some of which intersects a lot with psychology, of like strength finder type surveys that can be very useful, but what they're actually doing is giving you a cross-sectional view of your skills and who you are now and purporting to tell you where you should be going, basically. And I think that's confusing and something that psychologists can really help people who are in the middle of development figure out, that they are not going to be who they are right now. And when I kind of realized that as an athlete, I felt that that was a very empowering. That some of the greatest things that ever happened to me, one, being a walk-on so nobody paid attention to me. Two, going out so fast in one race that I blew up and realized like the sun was still going to rise the next day, and as long as I eventually ran a decent race, the social disapproval would disappear. And three, realizing that I was not going to be who I was at the moment, and that it was on me to figure out who I could become. So I think those are real, they sound like squishy skills, but I think they're incredibly important. And not just for, so like I was mentioning Brent at the beginning of this talk, because I was such a nervous speaker, I do the same things I used to do for races pretty much before I talk, and find that incredibly valuable. So I'm still profiting from the personal exploration that I gained in sports. And luckily, even though the coach wasn't so interested in me, there were some other athletes who were better at the time who really helped me walk that path.
So I love your know thyself philosophy in the midst of this. And one of the gems, one of the many gems in your presentation, was that video in China showing the divers instantaneously seeing their water strike after a dive.
Yeah.
Can you put that into perspective on how that can be enhanced and technologically taken to a whole another level besides a simple visual immediately afterwards?
Yeah, and I don't even think it has to be technologically. I think there's so much low-hanging fruit, we don't even have to skip to the technology yet. So there are, of course, things like biofeedback and all those sorts of things, but self-regulatory learning, we know, is a characteristic of most athletes who go on to become elite. In the Netherlands, they've shown that the same thing is true for most students who go on to become elite. They learn from the things they're doing. In some cases in sports, self-regulatory learning can be really easy. Like you shoot a free throw, it goes off to the left or the right, you adjust and try something different. But in many cases, it's not, and people aren't tracking what they're doing. Right? Like keeping a training diary was incredibly important for me. The Golden State Warriors try all, gadgetry, like all the NBA teams do, to monitor rest and recovery and all this stuff. But last time I checked in with them, the most important was the player's journal that they themselves kept that was also read or shared with someone they trusted. And that journal is taking data from the whole organism, not just from their wrist or from their heart rate or whatever. And there's so little of that being done that I don't know how people kind of expect to enhance self-regulatory learning if they're not recording how something went in the past. So way before the technology, I think there are whole organism mechanisms of taking data and promoting self-regulatory training that are low-hanging fruit that we're not even really doing. I apply this to everything I do, writing, whatever it is, because otherwise you're plateauing, right? There's an incredible literature about speed typing that shows basically we all get pretty fast and then plateau because we're fine. But if you want to get better, you set the metronome a little faster, type regardless of the errors, and do it a little faster each day. And eventually you even change where the keys are and things like that. And I think it's kind of a good, I know I'm totally out of time, sorry. Anyway, I think it's kind of emblematic of the fact that most of what we're doing is we've settled for a good enough plateau, and without promoting self-regulatory learning and reflecting on what we're doing, that's where you're going to stay, on that plateau. Sorry, I know I can't take any more questions. My mistake. Thank you.